I don't know if you want to call them protocols or interventions across an ERAS protocol that really addresses the patient's physical and psychological conditions before, during, and after surgery. And so what are the things that we can implement to enhance their outcomes and enhance their recovery? And the research around this is also very strong. And so the things that we can implement are heavily research-backed, and they're all aimed to promote a faster recovery. Patients feel better, and they get back to their normal life routine quicker.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this week's episode of First Case, we sit down with Lisa Spruce, the Senior Director of Evidence-Based Perioperative Practice at AORN, and we are going to be dispelling a very common practice and a common myth. It says all patients must be NPO after midnight. And if that makes you a little nervous that we're saying they don't, well, make sure you tune in because Lisa is going to show us how new research is changing our practices and how patients can benefit from enhanced recovery after surgery or ERAS protocols. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Lisa Spruce.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Lisa Spruce, Senior Director of Evidence-Based Perioperative Practice at AORN. And Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am super excited to get to talk to you. And I think that this conversation is going to be so much fun today because this idea that all patients have to be NPO after midnight is just a prevalent idea. And today we're going to be talking about doing things differently, and it almost feels wrong because we're so used to how we've always done it. So I love tackling topics like that, and I love challenging the way we've always done it mentality. So I am really looking forward to our conversation today. But first, before I just have the whole conversation myself, which I'm really guilty of doing most days anyway, please take a minute and just introduce yourself to everyone.
Oh, thank you. So I am Lisa Spruce, like you said. I work for AORN. I've been at AORN for 13 years. I lead the nursing practice team that writes our guidelines, and I have some clinical oversight of our Center of Excellence. And prior to that, I've been a clinician most of my career in advanced practice, and I had a dual clinical nurse specialist and nurse practitioner credential. And so clinical practice has really been my passion, and that's sort of where I've stayed in my career, and then going from there to the OR, and then I was in the OR for many, many, many years and still love it. My favorite thing. So here we are.
Okay, well, I'm curious. When you were in the OR, what was your favorite service?
Oh, that's a good question. You know what? You're going to be so surprised to hear me say it, but it was podiatry.
Really? Nobody says podiatry. Was it a particularly good surgeon that you worked with? Yeah.
Yeah. Just a fabulous surgeon. So fun to work with. And I worked for 15 years in outpatient surgery, which ended up being something I loved because I actually dual trained. And so I could circulate and I could recover patients. I could do pre-op, and I worked in the GI lab too. So it was so much fun to get to do all those roles in addition to circulating, which I loved so much. But yes, podiatry was a fun case to circulate, and I liked it.
Well, that is a fun little nugget of information.
I know nobody says that.
Nobody says podiatry, but then again, like always talk about how orthopedics is my favorite. But if I look back on all of the things I've done, I actually also would say that plastics was my favorite, but it's not for the service line. It's for a surgeon that I worked with back in the day. Loved him, loved his room. And so I loved his version of plastics, I guess, as we, did cases in his room, because it was a surgeon. And sometimes the surgeons can just really, we know they can break the day, but they can also make the day and make it so much fun for sure.
That can make the difference for us as nurses. So,
yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, that is really cool. I'm sorry I had to just find out more about you and your OR experience. But as we talk about the operating room and we talk about you working in pre-op even, we think about this idea that, and really it's a myth anymore, that a patient has to be NPO after midnight or we can't do surgery on them. And I really want to talk more about that and talk about what it was, how it came about, and then really where we're moving to with research and with evidence-based practice. So let's start at the beginning. Where did the NPO after midnight rule come from? And maybe even how far back have we been instituting this practice?
Well, this is a great topic because from my recollection, that is how it always was. When I thought back about it, I'm like, this is how it was for every patient, every place I ever worked. And then I thought, well, when did this become a recommendation to, the fasting guidelines? Those fasting guidelines came out in 2010. Yes. So it's been 15 years that the recommendation for fasting came out. And in 15 years, I never saw anybody follow those. So I think that's very interesting. And I thought, I've been thinking so much about this, and I think we became a victim of what I call and what is called groupthink. And yes, so somebody said, oh, let's make our patients, everybody NPO after midnight. And the reason that I was told in places that I worked was so they could manipulate the schedule, move patients up, that kind of thing. And nobody thought to say, is that a good idea? How does that affect the patient? So nobody questioned that. And I think when we become victims of groupthink, that stops us from being critical thinkers. It stops us from questioning practice. And is this a good practice? Where's the evidence? And asking those questions. And I think as nurses, especially when it's a person that we perceive to be an authority, we don't always question that. And I think that's something we have been working on changing. And I think it is changing, but honestly, I still see it today, NPO after midnight. And I'll ask people, patients, were you asked to be NPO after midnight? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but why?
They don't think to answer
yeah,
it.
They don't question it, but that's what everybody expects. Everybody just assumes they're going to show up to the surgery center or to the hospital, dehydrated and starving, and that's just what you're supposed to do before you have surgery. And there's so much better practice out there now than that practice. But even with the current research, like I said, people still expect this, and this still happens. In the surgery center that I've been working in for the past few years, all of our patients come in NPO after midnight. That's the first question they're asking in pre-op. When was the last time you had anything to eat or drink? And anything that comes out as something different than midnight, they're like, whoa, pump the brakes, like, hold up. And so why do you think we are still stuck to this NPO after midnight practice, even with the other research that's out there?
I'm going to say that, again, that we don't question these practices, it takes one creative, enthusiastic person to change a practice in a clinical setting. And I'll give you a personal example. So I had to have a rotator cuff repair surgery. And I fully expected, this was a physician-owned outpatient surgery center. I loved my orthopedic doctor, and he was one of the owners. I fully expected they were going to call me and say, you're NPO after midnight. And I'm like, I am not going to be NPO after midnight. Because my surgery was at 3 p.m. And I'm like, there's no way I'm doing that. But the anesthesiologist called me and said, oh, I want you to get up and have breakfast, and you can drink up to 2 hours before your surgery. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
And I talked to him about it. And he said, I took this on. Me, as a single doctor, I decided to take this on, implement ERAS in this facility with every patient. He wrote all the standardized order sets. And so every patient at that outpatient surgery center, which was only 3 OR rooms, it was really small. I think it takes one person like that.
It does.
Whether it's a nurse or a physician, whoever that is passionate about quality care and that works in a culture of continuous improvement. And they take on these topics and they make changes. That's what I think it's going to take.
I agree. And I think thinking just from my own standpoint, because I've brought it up a few times at my last facility, and they're like, well, this is what the surgeons want. The doctors want this. And you think about, okay, well, how am I going to change the culture? How am I going to change the attitudes? And then are the surgeons going to listen to me as a nurse? Are they going to listen to me telling them, how to change their practice or to change what we're doing or modifying the way we treat patients? And so I can see why people would be maybe trepidatious of challenging the status quo. And yet there's so much evidence out there to speak to ERAS protocols and the ways that they can benefit our patients. It's funny that you mentioned that for your surgery, you were told to eat and drink and do the things. My sister-in-law just had surgery last December, and I had gone to visit her before her surgery, and she was going through her packet from the surgeon, and she's like, yeah, they give me this, and they've given me this nutrition drink, and they said I need to drink it at a certain time, and I have to have this, and I have to that, and I'm like, whoa, that's amazing. That is so cool, because just like you, I was expecting them to, have her starving and all this stuff. So I love hearing about where ERAS has been implemented. But I also think it's also helpful to think about maybe the negative side of it when we think about how patients can be negatively affected by a strict NPO status. And can you talk a little bit about the ways physically the patient is affected if we have them completely NPO for hours on end before surgery?
Yeah. And I think we probably have all seen it. We've probably all seen it and didn't realize that that's why this patient was so sick. When they came out of recovery, probably don't even think about, well, they're sick, they're nauseated, they feel horrible. We never connected that those were the things that were causing it because they have been starved and they were dehydrated. So we as nurses probably never thought about that. And if you look at the literature, especially the studies that the ASA has done, because they did meta-analysis and systematic reviews of randomized control trials, which is the highest level of evidence you can get on this topic. And they were able to demonstrate a ton of positive effects from making sure patients were basically hydrated before they came. And they actually saw a reduction in a risk of aspiration, not an increased risk. So I think, there was all kinds of things that came out of their work. There's a whole slew of benefits. And I think for me, if I was going to make that change, I would print that out and take it to either anesthesia or the surgeon and say, look at this evidence. This is the highest quality of evidence you can get, and here are all the benefits. And in fact, one of the things they did talk about was the avoidance of delays and cancellations, because patients aren't so sick. They aren't, and I also think patients handle this differently. So some people they're okay going 8 hours without eating and drinking, but some people are not. And I think patients have increased satisfaction if they're not dehydrated. And also, you can get hypoglycemic from not eating. So I think those are the things we just sort of don't think about. And if you're looking at it like, okay, well, this is better for scheduling purposes, that I could call people, move them around, that's not where we want to be.
Exactly. That is not patient-centered, patient-focused care. That is schedule-centric or scheduling-centered care. And then ultimately that takes the health and welfare of the patient out of the equation. And then suddenly we're not doing what's best for them. And so we've already mentioned it. We've talked about these protocols. We've mentioned ERAS already, but I really want to kind of get into that because ERAS protocols are the modern day answer or response to the just strict starvation NPO after midnight approach that we've had. But let's talk about it from just the very beginning. Tell us, what are ERAS protocols?
So just basically put, they are protocols, keeping this in mind, they are synergistic. So you can't just say, I'm going to implement one of these things. You've got to implement all of these things because they work together. So there are protocols or interventions across an ERAS protocol that really addresses the patient's physical and psychological conditions before, during, and after surgery. And so what are the things that we can implement to enhance their outcomes and enhance their recovery? And the research around this is also very strong. And so the things that we can implement are heavily research backed, and they're all aimed to promote a faster recovery. Patients feel better and they get back to their normal life routine quicker. And that's basically what it is.
Having patients optimized for surgery so that their bodies have the carbohydrate source and the energy that they need to address the surgical onslaught that they are about to experience, but then also to get them through that surgery and into the recovery period with available nutrition, available physical resources to help them in that post-op moment. And then as they begin their recovery, they're starting with a leg up compared to starting depleted. And I think that is to me, that is a really important component of what ERAS offers our patients. Because when I did bring it up at my last facility, I was actually told, oh, that's just for patients having colon surgery. I'm like, no, hold up. What's good enough for a patient having colon surgery ought to be applicable to a patient having any surgery. And so the fact that they are applicable to all is, I think, beneficial to all of our patients. But I guess in that vein, people are familiar or more familiar maybe with ERAS when it comes to those, colon cases or big GI surgeries. Is there any difference or nuance depending on the surgery you're having, or are all the guidelines applicable all the same for every patient?
So I did a systematic review of the evidence, and all of the research is applicable to everyone. I do not address in that guideline intraoperative, the surgical technique, or what a surgeon might do. Now, the ERAS Society, which is the big international society, they have certain protocols which they do guide surgeons on things to do with those individual surgeries. And there's probably, 20, 25 of them. That is not what I addressed. I addressed what perioperative teams can implement with everybody, all patients, all surgeries. So there is nuance in what the surgeons do in those cases. They're all the same in prehab, in pre-op, in anesthesia care, and post-op is the same for everybody.
Wow. Oh, that's really good to hear. Yeah. Definitely. All right. So then let's think about patients. Okay. So patients also know that they're not, I think, patients break the rules all the time. However, generally when patients think about surgery, like, oh yeah, they're not going to let me have anything to eat or drink. I think it's just a prevalent understanding within our society. But on the flip side, some people are still going to get nervous if you're like, oh yeah, we have a nutritional drink or a Gatorade or something that, we want you to drink really close to the time of surgery. And you've mentioned it already, but I wanted to talk about the research with the safety of having these drinks so close to surgery. Can you talk any more about what the research says about safety?
Yeah, so they're completely safe. There has never been any adverse events that have been in the literature. Now, the carbohydrate loading drinks are not as supported by research as the fasting guidelines. So they're recommended as you may do this. And if you don't want to do that, then just make sure people are getting water up to 2 hours before. And diabetic patients, or perhaps patients that are having some sort of GI tract surgery, they might treat them a little bit differently. And so diabetic patients, you're going to have to talk to the anesthesiologist or anesthesia care provider about whether or not you want them to have a drink. But keeping in mind too that when you're withholding food from anybody, you can become hypoglycemic. So the evidence around a carb drink is pretty much, it's moderate, I would say, evidence. There hasn't been a lot of studies on it, but the studies I've read, there were no detrimental effects. There was no downside to doing it, but you might want to think about it if you've got to monitor a diabetic patient's blood sugar. So, and see what happens. So those are the little nuances with the carbohydrate drinks. But I had one and I felt like, ooh, I've got all this energy. You feel so much better. And it's so great. Patient satisfaction was really high with being able to have a carbohydrate drink. So, and then in the guideline, we say you may consider giving a carbohydrate drink. Yep.
Well, I think it is true, because think about your experience if you're a patient and you've been told be NPO after midnight, and here you are, you haven't eaten anything, you come to the surgery center, and then, oh wait, now your surgery isn't until noon or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and you're just sitting there hungry and thirsty, and your mouth gets so thick and sticky, and it's just unpleasant. And yes, you have an IV, and yes, you're not, it's doing its thing, but just that experience of being able to have something to drink and not feel like you're just so famished has got to really make it better for the patient.
I know every time I think about this, when I was in nurse practitioner school, I learned this phrase, and it was called, if the gut works, use it. If the gut
I
works,
love
use it.
that.
And it was really showing how important it is to make sure people are eating and drinking. Like, we sort of underemphasize the importance of that in healing and recovering. And the interesting thing too, in my surgery, as soon as I woke up, they gave me applesauce. It's like,
Really?
here, eat. You need to eat something.
Have some
Okay.
food.
Yeah,
Wow.
which also goes along with the same philosophy of getting that nutrition going immediately after. So I think we sort of under recognize the importance of that.
Okay, so I'm curious too, in your research as you were working on the guideline and looking at all of the data that's out there, were there any like exceptions or any patient exceptions to the guidelines or to implementing the same kind of ERAS protocols?
No exceptions. No.
Wow.
It's safe to implement in every single patient. And if you just took that guideline and looked at what's recommended, it is simple things. It is not things that are hard to do. It's just being able to coordinate as teams and come together and say, we're going to do this. This is going to transform care if we do this for all our patients, and then just getting everybody to do this together. I do think it's transformative. And if we can get there, we will improve the healthcare of our country so greatly if we can all get there. Yeah.
All right. So you said that it's really simple stuff, but tell me more about it. What all is recommended in the guideline?
Okay. So let's start with the surgical optimization part. So that's getting you ready to have surgery. Most people are not going to need anything, but you need to make sure that if you recognize that someone has a cardiovascular risk, if they are a heavy smoker, there are things that you can optimize before their health, before they even ever come in. Like, you can put them in a walking program. Even a walking 30 minutes a day is going to drastically make a difference in how they recover. Smoking cessation. So there's these little easy things that you can do before. Okay, let's just say your patient, it's an emergency and you can't do that. Fine, you don't have to do any of that, but then you can implement the rest of it. So let's talk about pre-op. And here's one of the biggest things for me. We want to decrease opioid consumption because that's a big problem in our country. So you got to talk to patients even before pre-op about how their pain is going to be managed and how we're going to do multimodal pain management. So we're not going to just give you a pill. We're going to put a block in. We're going to give you Tylenol. We're going to give you a local anesthetic. Those are the kinds of things we want to talk to people about, so they don't have these expectations that I'm going to have this big opioid dosage afterwards. So to me, that's one of the biggest advantages of ERAS. Okay, then it's warming your patient, making sure they've got VTE prophylaxis, which is, your SCDs. It's doing a surgical site infection bundle, so make sure they aren't getting infected. It's not sedating them. We tend to want to sedate people in pre-op. Don't sedate them. Let's deal with their nerves. Let's talk to them. Let's deal with their anxiety. They do much better if you don't sedate them, and they can walk back to their surgery, or they can be wheeled back, but they're awake, and then they can participate in their timeout. So that's another advantage. And then in anesthesia, it's focused anesthesia care based on the patient's comorbidities. So anesthesia has a plan of care, and they keep them euvolemic. So they're not getting too much fluid and they're not getting too little fluid, which is detrimental because then, the perfusion of their organs. So it's that anesthesia care plan. So anesthesia has a plan for these patients so that they're monitoring their cardiac output. And you can monitor cardiac output now non-invasively, which is so great because you don't have to have a central line to do it. And so then it's that, and then it's all the multimodal pain management strategies, which are things we all do. We all see people getting blocks. We get pain pumps put in. And then thinking about, using ice, using heat. There are just all these things that you can think about managing people's pain. Getting them out of bed as quickly as possible is huge, huge, huge. If you give them, round the clock opioids, they're not going to want to get up. You got to get up. You got to move. You got to walk. You got to get into rehab. You got to go back, get into physical therapy. So it's all these things. If you think about them collectively, they're so beneficial. So to me, those are simple things. They're not rocket science.
No, and it's like you go through the list, like, oh yeah, of course we should be doing this. Like, why aren't we doing this?
Probably doing a lot of it.
We're probably doing a lot of it, which means for those people who don't necessarily have ERAS protocols implemented in their facility, they could probably look around and be like, oh, but we have parts of it. We could probably just take the next step and move forward and actually implement the full picture. Which leads me to my next question, actually, is what challenges do you think teams face when they see the guideline, they see the benefits of ERAS, and they want to implement it? What are they running up against in their facilities?
Well, I think the first thing potentially is getting leadership buy-in. And so that is why in the ERAS Center of Excellence program, we created a business case. So just to start out, here's the whole business case around why you should do this. Even we look at cost. We looked at cost of per patient in an ERAS pathway and how much cost saving there was. And there's a lot. So that's one thing, is just being able to articulate this to the leaders who are concerned about cost, and they should be. So here's why you should do it, and here's how that helps. And then I think it's inconsistent practices across service lines. Well, everybody needs to be on the same page. Everybody needs to be doing consistent practices, which if you write standardized order sets, which is what they did at the surgery center that I went to, then everybody's going to get the same care. So that's the second thing. And then I think it's resistance to change, which we all are there. We all know nobody wants to change. Otherwise, we wouldn't be saying NPO after midnight.
We wouldn't be here if we were all open to change.
Yeah, so that, and then, gaps in education, gaps in tracking data. This is one thing that you can really track outcomes on and see a huge difference. So the guideline offers all these ideas for what you should track for quality outcomes, process measures, and patient outcomes. So I think it's those things. And I'm telling you, if people want to implement this, you go through this free. The Center of Excellence is a free program. We walk you through it step by step by step. It's so easy to do it.
Okay, so actually, I think that puts a bow on all of this very nicely, and I want to give you the chance to give some final thoughts, but also to put a plug in again for how people can find the Center of Excellence that AORN has. So that now we're recording this earlier, but by the time our listeners are hearing this, it'll already be available. It'll be out there for them to find. So as we bring our conversation to a close, I am going to give you the mic again, but make sure you tell us exactly where all of that can be found so that anybody listening can take advantage of it.
Yeah. One of the last things I want to talk about, because I think it's coming, and it's really important, is the CMS Teams model of care, which is coming for all of us. And if you look at what they require and what an ERAS program is, they are perfectly in alignment. So I'm going to say to those facilities out there that if you put an ERAS protocol in place with all your patients, and CMS comes out, they're trialing it now in 700 hospitals, I think, across the country, in about 5 surgeries. So there's just 5 surgeries that they're trialing it in. That is coming for everybody, and it is tied to their payment. So you put an ERAS program in place, you are going to be perfectly aligned with that model that is coming, and you'll be way ahead of the game.
Well,
and so awesome. I think that's important to know. And that's also written, I wrote it up in that business case so people can see this is coming for us. It is coming for everybody. But you can find ERAS Center of Excellence on AORN's website under just AORN Center of Excellence, because this was our 3rd program. And it's going to be easy. You just go in there, sign up, and we'll send you all the things, and you're in. And you enroll and you take the education, which is great because you don't have to educate your staff. We will educate them for you. And then we will provide you all the resources and everything you need to actually implement this at your facility. So, and we are also open to having conversations. If you want us to have a meeting with you and help you do it, we are here to help everybody get there. And we want that because, as nurses and as our mission and why we became perioperative nurses is to give our patients the best care that we can. And this is the way to do it.
I think you said it very eloquently, and there's not really much I have to add. But as we think about our conversation today, just we're moving past just strictly NPO after midnight. There's better practice. There's research. There is so much more we can do. And when we think about it in terms of patient care, like you said, we're optimizing our patients for surgery, and we're doing all that we can to give their body the best chance to have a successful surgical outcome. So, Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today and walking us through the guideline, through ERAS, and helping us hopefully educate about this NPO after midnight idea.
Yes, please, let's move the bar.
Move it on up, move it out. So for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was Lisa Spruce, Senior Director of Evidence-Based Perioperative Practice at AORN, and she really brought us just all of the insight on the guideline of the implementation of ERAS. And I think she really helped us challenge the practice of keeping all of our patients NPO after midnight. Like so many other things we've discussed, new evidence and new research paves the way for new practices. And all of us have to be open to accepting those and changing what we do. I hope that you are able to take some new knowledge away from this conversation today and raise the standard, raise the bar in your own facility and change the practice and implement ERAS guidelines and protocols within your own facility. That is going to do it for this week's interview. On behalf of Chris, myself, and our whole team, thanks for listening to this week's episode of First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.